Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marilyn Krause. I'm a past president of the Milwaukee Press Club, and I'd like to welcome you all here to the Newsroom Pub. And before you leave, if you haven't previously, take a look at our signature collection. It's quite historic. It goes back, I believe, to the 1880s or 1890s, and you'll find some really interesting names up there. We're delighted, absolutely delighted to have Senator Ron Johnson with us today. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Spectrum News One, and our supporting sponsor is We Energies. I'd like also to thank our event partner, WisPolitics.com. We love that partnership that we've had for several years. They are often our partners on Newsmaker Luncheons and other events that we do. And as part of that series, we have additional sponsors of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training, 1125 at Pabst, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Spectrum. Now I'd like to welcome our media panel, Charles Benson of TMJ4 News, Emilee Fannon of CBS 58, and Bill Glauber from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. So now we're going to get our program. I'm happy to introduce Senator Ron Johnson.
Well, thank you, Marilyn, and I want to thank the Milwaukee Press Club for inviting me here. I guess I'm supposed to start out with some remarks before we open up to questions. Is that correct? I ran in 2010, coming out of the business sector, manufacturing. Ran on a pretty simple platform. Freedom, which I always calls the essential ingredient of America. It's what Americans use to dream and aspire and build and create this marvel we call America. Freedom that I think continues to be under assault. Our freedom continues to wane. As government grows, freedom necessarily recedes. And part of the other problem with growing government is we're also mortgaging our kids' future. So those two reasons why I stepped up the plate in 2010 was to try and preserve and protect freedom and try and stop the mortgaging of our kids' future. Unfortunately, neither one of those things has worked out too well, and we remain under threat. When I first got to Washington, D.C., Admiral Mike Mullen was talking about, when he was asked about what was the greatest threat facing America, you always say our debt and deficit. And that hasn't changed. But what has changed is we continue to just whistle by the graveyard. We're not even addressing it. Examples of it is we're not doing anything in terms of, for example, in the Senate, passing a budget. We're not even talking about a budget. I'm on the budget committee. We're holding hearings on climate change in the budget. But we're not actually taking a look at how much we spend and how much we're further putting our kids into debt. So let me just throw out some numbers for you. In 2019, before the pandemic recession, the federal government in total spent about $4.4 trillion. What was interesting while we were debating the omnibus at the end of last year to fund the current fiscal year that we're already in, I would ask my colleagues, but I also ask reporters, simple question, do you know how much money we spent last year? And I would just get blank stares. And I would give them immediate absolution and say, don't worry, it's not your fault. You don't know because nobody ever talks about it. We don't talk about it here. We're not passing bills. We only debate and pass appropriations for about 30% of our budget. But the answer was $6.2 trillion. So we'd gone from $4.4 trillion, and because of the massive out-of-control spending during the pandemic, which was used to justify this massive buildup in debt and deficits, we've been spending over $6 trillion. Now President Biden's proposal would be to spend $8 or $6.9 trillion in the next fiscal year. Put us on a path toward $50 trillion in debt, like $32 trillion isn't enough. So this is obviously completely out of control. It's the reason why we have 40-year high inflation. It's becoming more and more endemic. I'm concerned about stagflation. I've been quite honestly warning people about that since January 2021 when they were talking about yet another COVID relief bill that we didn't need at all. Last thing we needed in 2021 was stimulus. We needed some fiscal constraint. We still need that fiscal constraint. So again, my two main issues in 2010 were freedom. We have to stop mortgaging our kids' future, but from my standpoint, there's even a greater or more fundamental value that we need to start seriously discussing and considering, and that value is truth. And it's becoming harder and harder to discern. And we can't continue as a democracy in freedom if we don't have an unbiased media that holds both sides equally accountable and that does a whole lot better helping Americans discern the truth. And it's not coming from the Trusted News Initiative, trust me. So with that, I'm happy to open up to any questions you've got. By the way, let's keep them on important issues. I mean, we have significant challenges facing our nation. And I think an awful lot of these ancillary issues, it's almost like a magician, the shiny object, taking our eye off the ball of how we're losing our freedom and mortgaging our kids' future. But with that, Charles.
Well, this is an item that's been in the news, the abortion bill. And I'm wondering if you have any concerns about this FDA-approved drug, and do you agree with former Vice President Pence, who said over the weekend this medication should be off the market?
Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical researcher. I mean, you understand that. I think there are serious issues in terms of how this has been not only approved, but how it's been expanded in terms of use without doctor prescription. I think you need to be concerned about that. This is a powerful drug. So past that point, I'm glad you brought up the abortion issue. One of the things I was doing as I traveled around the state, going to Republican district caucuses, is I was asking Republicans, we need to lead on this issue. I absolutely supported the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, which I think was wrongly decided. To me, the best part about the Dobbs decision, it was taking that decision and placing it where it really ought to be decided is in the hands of we the people in each 50 state. I didn't like under Roe that 9 justices decided that profound moral issue, as Justice Alito appropriately called it, for all of us. I didn't think 535 members of Congress should decide that profound moral issue. I don't think 132 members of the Wisconsin State Legislature ought to. I think we the people ought to decide that, which is why I proposed during my campaign. By the way, this wasn't something just to get me through a campaign. This is something I felt was the way to decide this issue ever since I went down to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago after the Roe versus Wade decision. And I saw that marvelous exhibit there where you have babies, I call it babies in a jar, from the moment of conception to a full-term baby. And my thought process was, because it was already being a very divisive issue, I thought, well, the way to decide this issue for America is to basically use this exhibit, this information, this knowledge, to decide the question that I proposed for a one-time single-issue referendum for Wisconsin. This question that we have to decide is, at what point does society have the responsibility to protect life? When you ask it that way, it acknowledges the fact that women have rights. But at some point in time, an unborn child in the womb also has those rights, and that's the decision we have to make. So I propose a one-time single-issue referendum. I wouldn't want this on the ballot with any other issue. And leading up to that referendum, my suggestion would be have an intensive education campaign on all sides. You know, talking about what does a baby look like inside the womb at every point of gestation. And quite honestly, as abhorrent as it would be to discuss, what does an abortion look like as well? We literally have not had that discussion, that education, that debate ever since Roe v. Wade was decided. It's time we have it. And so really what I was suggesting at these caucuses is that we design forums in all 8 districts of the state. We bring all sides in, and we have presentations made from pro-life to pro-choice. And then we hold a sample referendum with my sample ballot, where there's basically 10 choices to decide that question. At what point does society have the responsibility to protect life? At conception, all the way down through no protections whatsoever. And by the way, little wrinkle on this would be probably a perfect application for ranked choice voting. give every voter 3 choices. The number 1 pick, they get fill in 3 dots. Number 2 pick 2 dots, and their third choice 1 dot. I think if you would do that, you'd probably pretty easily discern, have at least one, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, it's probably about where we're going to find, I would think, 1 or 2, 3 months. At that point, we'd protect life. So I know it's a much longer senatorial answer to your question there, but that's what we have to decide.
And as you know, the governor did call for that.
No, he didn't. He called for a referendum to codify Roe.
So
It's completely different. I mean, I was recommending a referendum to actually decide the question. Again, at what point does society have a responsibility to protect life?
But just going back to the FDA, some people see it as a political issue versus a science issue, and that this 20 years since this pill has been on the market, that it's perceived as a safe drug to use.
Well, certainly the pandemic and COVID has certainly exposed an awful lot. And one of the things I think has been exposed is that our federal health agencies have been captured by big pharma. Medical research, medical science, medical journals have been corrupted by that process. Our federal health agencies, FDA, CDC, NIH, have not been honest with Americans. They have not been transparent. So when you understand what's happened during COVID and then you apply it to another issue, I guess I have my doubts about the FDA following the science in this one and not playing politics with that as well.
But nothing specific in terms of this particular drug.
No, listen, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical researcher. I think we should exercise caution. Just with Paxlovid. I mean, Paxlovid is the early treatment they approved. Just happens to be patentable by Pfizer, costing over $500. It has all kinds of different dangerous drug interactions with all kinds of common drugs. And there was a movement. I think they actually approved this to have pharmacists prescribe this. I mean, this is absurd. What is happening? So again, no, I think the FDA, the CDC, certainly their lack of response to my more than 50 oversight letters on these issues. I mean, I don't trust them. And I think that's awful. I think we need a federal health agencies to guarantee safety of drugs and of food. We need a CDC whose mission is to gather information, then honestly disseminate it to the public. They're not doing that. They are failing miserably in their mission. They failed miserably in their mission.
I want to move on to the topic after you recently attended an anti-vaccine conference here in Wisconsin, and you also said that one of the main reasons you decided to run for re-election was to advocate for vaccine injuries. However, many of your claims, such as thousands of people dying after getting the vaccine, have been debunked. So I guess, why do you believe this is such an important issue when statewide polling shows many other top concerns of voters, including crime, inflation, abortion, among other things?
So you've just provided a perfect example of what's wrong with journalism. You said my claims have been debunked. Where and when? There's not one thing I've said during this COVID that has been proven untrue. Now, there are people that maybe disagree with me, but today on VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which the FDA and CDC were touting prior to gaining the emergency use authorization for the vaccine, they had such a great safety surveillance system. If you missed a couple days of work due to that vaccine, they're going to have a CDC representative calling you up and following up on that. That's how seriously they're going to take safety on the vaccine. They never intended to do that, and they certainly haven't done that. So on VAERS today, the most up-to-date figures, there have been over 35,000 deaths reported on the VAERS system worldwide associated with the COVID-19 vaccine. Over 1.5 million adverse events. Now, there are two main complaints about the VAERS system. One, it doesn't prove causation. That's true. But do you realize that of those 35,000 deaths, 25% either occur on the day of vaccination or within day 1 or 2. So maybe it doesn't prove causation, but it certainly gives a guy like me concern. I was concerned about it back in March and April of 2021. 35,000 deaths, 25% occurring on day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. The other problem with VAERS is it dramatically understates the number of adverse events. Dramatically. So again, you're saying that what I've said about the safety of the vaccines has been debunked. It hasn't been debunked at all. Have you not noticed the Twitter files? Have you not noticed how federal health agencies were censoring truth and calling it misinformation. So what you just said, you accused me of is saying something that's been debunked is completely false.
Anyone can submit anything on that website, the one you're referring to, too, and it's not
Yeah,
backed by
but that's
officials.
but they don't. Okay, there's also it's also I think a felony to misreport of VAERS. Most of those VAERS reports are submitted by health professionals. Doctors have been heavily dissuaded from conveying them. You need to get a little more educated in terms of VAERS.
Are you still unvaccinated?
Which vaccination? I have just about every vaccine, but not the COVID vaccine. I had COVID. And oh, by the way, remember I was vilified as being anti-vax because at that time, I was letting elderly people who are more vulnerable to get a limited number of vaccines, okay? But then I was pilloried for saying that, natural immunity would probably be stronger than the vaccine. That's been proven true. Natural immunity is far better with COVID than what the vaccine has been proven to have negative efficacy, not to mention the vaccine injuries. Got to get up to date on what's actually happening out there in terms of medical science. Bill.
First of all, I'd like to say Emilee is an outstanding journalist, and I will defend her.
She was just wrong right there.
That may be, but she's an outstanding journalist. You have drawn a lot of interest about Hunter Biden and some of his activities and some of the investigations. I want to draw a larger question. Do you think that impacts Joe Biden? Do you think President Biden is corrupt?
Yes. So let's go back to end of 2016, beginning of 2017, when the news story broke about possible Trump campaign collusion with Russia. That's now been proven to be completely false narrative, a hoax. I don't really see any members of the media outraged by the fact that they were fed false information. It was through my investigations we found that the FBI knew that the Steele dossier was actually prepared by somebody they had suspected investigated as being a Russian agent. So they knew the Steele dossier was Russian disinformation itself. And yet they allowed the Mueller probe to special counsel to go on. This happened for 2 years. Nobody's ever apologized for it. The media's never made amends. The media's never called out the people that gave them false information. I start investigating Hunter Biden with Chuck Grassley. We obtained Treasury records that show a vast web of foreign financial entanglements. Now again, these are U.S. records. We're interviewing U.S. persons. And yet the media is reporting, because they're being fed false information, that I am soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the only person that introduced Russian disinformation to our investigatory record was my ranking member, Democrat Senator Gary Peters. So now we know that Anthony Blinken, who was working for Joe Biden's campaign, now Secretary of State, he's the one that contacted Mike Morrell, I think former acting CIA director, to gin up this letter from 51 former foreign intelligence officials, said that the Hunter laptop had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. Now, our intelligence community, our law enforcement, knew the Hunter laptop was real. They had it in their possession as of December 2019. The FBI, by the way, immediately went to pre-debunk the laptop story in case it ever surfaced. Because as they leave the shop, Mr. McIsaac, they look over the show and say, hey, by the way, it's our experience that people who don't talk about these things don't get in trouble. Then the FBI provides us an unsolicited briefing in August of 2020 saying we're targets of Russian disinformation based on nothing. They had nothing to show. I knew it was a setup. It was. Designed in case that was ever off just, which it was, by the way. The day after Chuck Grassley and I issued our report, September 20th, 2022, or 28th, Mr. McIsaac called us up. He finally felt safe enough to go public with that laptop. Again, that laptop is real. The information contained in that is real. The Treasury records that show this vast web of compromising foreign financial entanglements is real. Now we know through more Treasury records, an additional 6 Biden family members were basically on the take. You don't think that's corrupt? You don't think that's sleazy? You don't think that compromised the American president? So again, what the mainstream media has been reporting is that I'm some conveyor of misinformation, that I'm a conspiracy theorist. No, I've been conveying the truth time and time and time again. And nobody's ever been proven me wrong on these things. I keep getting proven correct. And I've definitely been proven correct in terms of Hunter Biden and his corruption and his influence peddling and those conflict of interest, and how the Biden family Inc.'s sale of the Biden family name certainly compromises President Biden. Remember, that was a whole issue around the Russian collusion hoax with Trump, right? Can you imagine if you have a United States president that has these financial dealings with one of our adversaries? That's why the press bought that lie, hook, line, and sinker.
So if you believe he is corrupt, should he be impeached?
Well, first of all, he would never be convicted in the Senate. So I'm not sure we want to go down that road again. I think Democrats have done that time and time again. It's not helpful. I think you should be impeached in Mayorkas. If Anthony Blinken doesn't resign, he ought to be impeached as well. Those are 2 people I think the House should impeach, because I think that would just be revealing in terms of what the impeachment hearings would be. We need to understand how our border is completely wide open and that impact on America. And now with what Secretary Blinken did during the campaign, I mean, can you think of a greater fraud perpetrated on the American electorate than what Anthony Blinken did with that letter from 51 former intelligence officials? I mean, again, it's all collusion hoax. I mean, undermining our 2016 election, right? It was a lie. What was a lie was in 2020, perpetrated by the Biden campaign. Then Joe Biden lied in the debate following that. That interfered into our election to a far greater extent than anything Russia or China ever could hope to accomplish. I mean, think of that. Think of that interference of that one letter and those lies by Joe Biden.
Well, speaking of the president, he has made you the poster child on how not to fix Social Security. He enjoys talking about that. I don't know if you've heard it. And I'll paraphrase you. You have said it should not be a mandatory spending or a yearly automatic increase, but an annual budget review. So how would that change or prevent the looming solvency crisis? What needs to be prioritized?
Okay, so we have 2 categories of spending, discretionary and mandatory. So I'm using the words that we already have in terms of describing what we do as spending that is all on budget. And my main point when I made that comment, turning discretionary isn't to make Social Security discretionary. It's to have everything on budget, so we're looking at total spending. I mean, the point I was making to reporters during the omnibus, nobody even knew how much we were spending. Nobody knew. They knew, well, it's like over $1 trillion. Well, no, that's just a discretionary part of our. Okay, so my point, and again, it was completely taken out of context. I understand it. But my point was we need to understand the total amount of government spending every year. And if you want to save, and I do, I want to save, all I've ever said about Social Security is I want to save it. The greatest threat to Social Security is the massive debt and deficit spending. When this trust fund runs out, we've already crossed the Rubicon of benefits are exceeding revenue. And so the trust fund, and that's just an accounting gimmick, by the way. It's all that is. There's no real assets behind that. It's just treasury bonds that have no value to the federal government. It is a legal Ponzi scheme. I'm happy to defend that comment all day long. I mean, again, that's what a Ponzi scheme is. You get in early investors. You don't invest the money for them. You spend it, but you bring in the current investors and you pay off the former investors, right? That's what but this is a legal Ponzi scheme. Okay, so the greatest threat to that Social Security is when the trust fund runs out and you have nothing now to redeem to plus up the benefits. Will we have the financial wherewithal out of the general fund to honor those promises? That's why we need to be concerned about the debt and deficit. You know, when that happens, we'll be about $50 trillion in debt according to Biden's budget. And by the way, the greatest threat we have in terms of a debt crisis is it's happening right now under our nose. Saudi Arabia does a deal with China. They'll be selling oil to China, not using US dollars, not petrodollars. They're going to be using China's currency. Brazil's entering those types of agreements. When the US dollar ceases to become the world's reserve currency, we are in deep, deep trouble because we won't be able to print these dollars. We won't be able to keep our interest rates artificially low. And for every 1% increase in interest rates, our cost of borrowing, our interest goes up $320 billion. That's at $32 trillion worth of debt. That'll just keep increasing. If we were just to return to the average interest rate we paid on US government debt in the last 3 decades of the last century, 5.3%. That added about $1.2 trillion just to interest expense, which is about what we spend on Social Security a year. We're spending more now because we had, what, a 5.7% inflationary increase because of all this deficit spending. Again, this one, again, I appreciate we're talking about these things because this is serious business. We are putting our nation at risk with all this deficit spending and just whistling by the graveyard.
So that's why my question is then, by doing what you want to do, how does that prioritize the spending?
It would
and
force.
How would it solve the crisis?
It would force prioritization of spending. For example, we just voted for this. I didn't vote for it. Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, again, Orwellian names like Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. It's not anti-inflationary. Goldman Sachs, this is a report in the Wall Street Journal, the green energy boondoggles and the tax credits contained that. They're supposed to be about $400 billion, a little less. The real price take on that, according to the Goldman Sachs study, is about $1.2 trillion. We can't afford to be spending money trying to hold back the tides. It's a fantasy thinking we can do that. It's a fantasy thinking we can produce all the electric vehicles that people are contemplating. We don't have the minerals for it. The environmentalists won't let us mine them either. So again, all these things that are being proposed by the radical left, you know, all the fear mongering over climate change. We have, classic example. Again, we're not passing the budget. We're not debating a budget in budget committee. We're debating climate change in the budget. One of the hearings was talking about stranded assets, and they were all concerned about how this could create a debt crisis. The stranded fossil fuel assets, and they're talking about $400 billion. So I asked one of the witnesses, well, what do you think we've already spent on climate change globally? And he actually had an answer for me. He said about $5 trillion. Think of that, $5 trillion on climate change. Have we impacted it at all? Do you think we can? But let me just throw out a couple facts here, because these are important to understand the scaremongering and how futile and what a fantasy all this climate change stuff is. The Vostok ice core sample, very stable part of the ice shelf. You core down that, you can get a really good, accurate assessment of what global temperatures were. So over 440,000 years of time, they're showing basically we're in our 5th cycle. The previous 4 cycles had a temperature variation of around 22.7 degrees total. Very consistent, you know. The Greenland ice core samples over the last 10 to 20,000 years, the last glaciation period, shows a temperature variation of about 6.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I love asking this to the audience. I'll ask you guys, do you know how much the sea level's risen in the Bay of San Francisco since the last glaciation period? Anybody want to mention? Because everybody's concerned about, you know, the rise in sea temperatures, sea levels taking over Manhattan or whatever. You know what it is? 390 feet. So do you honestly think there's anything we can do with our feeble efforts here to hold back the tides? To stop those 22.7 degree cycles over geologic time? It's crazy what we're doing. But why are we doing it? Again, it's to create a state of fear so individuals can gain control and power over our lives. It's a loss of freedom. That's what this is all about. How can we take an issue, scare the you-know-what out of people, and take people's freedom away? I don't get it. I don't want to control anybody's life, but some people do.
Well, my question is on Social Security, and you've given a lot on climate change here. So if you prioritize the budget on it, does it then force senators and a conversation around changing the retirement age, increasing the payroll tax, or cutting benefits?
Yeah, so Charles, the first table stakes is to make sure that we have the financial wherewithal to plus up the benefits, so that we have the financial wherewithal to float bonds to replace the Social Security Trust Fund bonds when those are being redeemed on an annual basis. So you're going further down the stream in terms of, okay, well, how are we going to solve the whole thing? Well, the first table stakes is we better stabilize our financial situation now, because if we don't do that, all the things you're talking about will be meaningless. They'll be meaningless because we're already being in a debt crisis.
We're there already, aren't we?
Well, we certainly have seen the inklings with 40-year high inflation, yeah.
This past election, where you got reelected, there was an interesting dynamic on the ticket. You won, Governor Tony Evers won as well. The Republicans have kind of had this losing streak. They've now lost the last 14 out of 17 statewide elections. What do you think the problem is?
Well, first of all, in terms of getting out the vote, Democrats just have a much easier reality than we have. They can go in, and they've done a fabulous job of going into Dane County, for example, and mining every vote. Certainly used the abortion issue very effectively for that for those electors or citizens. Republicans have to go statewide, and we've got to extract votes from every small little community. It's just a much larger task. It's more difficult to do that. I think the abortion issue was certainly an important factor. One of the things I did, knowing it was coming, is I laid out the truth about my beliefs. I'm for contraceptive. I'm for in vitro fertilization. I would never prosecute a woman with an unplanned child. So I laid out all those facts, so it'd be more difficult for Democrats to lie about me. Now I'd say they still kind of said some half lies. I want to ban abortion. I never said that. I certainly voted or supported a ban after 20 weeks. From my standpoint, that's kind of table stakes at what point we ought to protect life. But I did that, and then I also proposed what I think is the solution to finally putting this very divisive issue behind us, which is that referendum. Let we the people decide at what point should we protect life. And again, I think most people, I think everybody universally believes that it's society's responsibility to protect life at some point, right? Whether it's either outside the womb, I think it's universal, but then I think even inside the womb, I think most people think that we should protect life at some point inside the womb. The tough choice is at what point.
Sticking on the topic of elections, I bring that up because Cleta Mitchell, who leads an election integrity group and serves as a board member of the Milwaukee-based Bradley Foundation, recently told Republican donors that conservatives need to limit voting on college campuses. She mentioned 4 states, including Wisconsin. Do you agree with her that voting is too easy for college students right now in Wisconsin?
Again, I want to make sure that only legitimate voters vote. That's true. I don't want people that shouldn't be voting. So I think we do need to do everything we can to prevent fraud in voting. But I'm not trying to limit people voting. I think we need to expand. Certainly people want to vote for us, and we need to give them a reason to do so.
I just want to go back. You said something on abortion, that you supported a ban for 20 weeks. Is that your view of a bill, a passed bill? Is that your view now? Is it 6 weeks, 15 weeks, 20 weeks?
My view would be I'd get one vote along with.
But where's your vote? Where's your vote?
It's all a secret ballot, Bill. No, listen. I'm not trying to dodge a question here. I'm trying to provide leadership in terms of how we can finally put this very divisive, profound moral issue behind us as a society. And let we the people decide. I don't want to impose my view on anybody else. I don't. There's certain things I'd like to, but no. This needs to be decided by we the people. Again, if I were to guess on where it would land, my guess would we'd start again with proper education. People really realize what a little baby looks like inside the womb at 8, 10, 12 weeks. I have a hard time believing people would allow abortion past about 12 weeks. Okay, but again, at the same time, I'll say, too early. I don't think the public will support that because again, I'm not a woman. I'm also very mindful of that I don't but it takes time to realize you're pregnant. Not always, but oftentimes. So I think you got to, again, it's the delicate balance. How do you recognize a woman's right versus the rights of a child? And that's something I want we the people to decide collectively in that one-time single-issue referendum.
I'd like to ask a political question. There's another Senate race that's already begun with Tammy Baldwin announcing that she's running for re-election. There are currently no Republicans running. Who do you think would be the strongest candidate, and what sort of campaign would they have to run? And also, have you talked with any of the potential runners, Tiffany, Glauber, Puffy, Mayor, Style, whomever? Have they sought your advice, and what advice have you given them?
Well, I think my first comment will be that my Republican colleagues that voted for the omnibus that included earmarks and took our earmarks, basically it helped Tammy Baldwin get a $255 million campaign contribution with the earmarks she brought home for Wisconsin. I was the guy during that omnibus debate that offered an amendment to outlaw all the earmarks. Earmarks are the gateway drug. That's how they got a bunch of Republicans also voting for a massive omnibus bill that I can pretty well guarantee you that not a one of them read. Okay? So I think earmarks are awful. We should not allow them. We'd taken that position with Republicans, and then all of a sudden some of my colleagues decided earmarks look pretty good. And Tammy walked away with $255 million, which, again, you'll see all the stories, all the wonderful things that that $255 million that we don't have, by the way, that we're going to have to print. It's all part of the problem. So we'll see those stories. But I don't get involved in primaries. I don't. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not going out trying to recruiting anybody. I let the Republican voters in the primary decide who our candidates are, and then I get behind that selected candidate.
And what do you think is the best line of attack on your colleague?
Well, when you take a look at what I said, the reason I ran, it's not coming under control yet, the debt and deficit. And she's right there voting for every massive spending program, not reading them, just happy to mortgage our kids' future without even a second thought.
Well, since we're on elections, let me just follow up to what Bill was saying. So one of the reasons why you ran for a third term, after indicating it would be two, was that you didn't like really where the state of the country was and felt you needed to be. So can you then think of a scenario where you would then run again in 2028 because of the situation that might be going on in the country?
Well, certainly in 2022, never say never. Okay, and you notice I didn't make any pledge.
I noticed.
I think you also notice I did it reluctantly. Trust me, when you're sitting there inside the dysfunction that is Washington, D.C. right now, you don't think I'm not having second thoughts? I go, well, I could have a pretty good life here, as opposed to just being the human resource department for the administration, doing confirmations all the time. We're not seriously talking about the debt and deficit of the budget. And, so no, it's, I would be surprised. But again, I didn't anticipate COVID. I didn't anticipate the corruption of our health system, our federal agencies, big pharma. I cannot believe that America has not rallied around these individuals that were injured by the vaccine. Vaccine injuries are not rare and mild. Okay, now they may be a pretty small percentage, but I guess vaccine injuries are rare when it's your neighbor that has one. It's a real problem if you've got one. So I didn't anticipate that, and I certainly didn't anticipate pretty much all of the media, all of our government, most elected officials just completely ignoring that problem. I'm sorry, I met them. I've dealt with them. I've cried with them. I can't turn my back on the vaccine injuries, so I don't know what might happen in 6 years.
So on coronavirus, you were recently on a committee where you talked to Secretary Sarah and raised some questions about things that have been turned over but not unredacted. When you look at the lab leak out of China, what is it that you think we don't know or need to know, especially when you look at what the former director of national intelligence has said about it and concluded about it, where they believe that the Chinese Communist Party that controlled this lab research, that there was this, that somehow that's where it all started?
Well, first let's talk about government oversight, okay, because that's the issue you're bringing up here. There's really, the American public deserves to know what its government's doing, which is why we passed the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA laws. So any citizen should be able to go to an agency and say, I want information, I want these documents, on that subject. And the agency should turn it over to them. They don't do that. You've got to take them to court. And then court has to enforce it. But, and I understand, that there's those FOIA requests are subject to redactions for a host of reasons. They're spelled out. Congress is not subject to those redactions. So what we did with these 4,000 pages of HHS documents, most of them were Anthony Fauci's emails, is we requested those things be given to us unredacted. So now we know the documents exist because they've been provided, and they're all heavily redacted. We want to look under the redactions. HHS hemmed and hawed. They finally, through the accommodation process, we said, okay, we'll settle for these 400 pages. Now, they didn't give them to us. They allowed us to read them 50 pages at a time in a reading room. Couldn't take copies, just take notes. So we did, I think, from about June 2021 through January 2022, we went in there in 50-page tranches, read those, and gleaned some more information. By the way, the redacted emails were incriminating enough, showing that Anthony Fauci was engaged in an immediate cover-up of his funding of, for example, the Wuhan lab and this very dangerous research. I mean, just redacted, they're incriminating enough. So we're down to the last 50 pages now. It's been over a year that we've been fighting with HHS to show us those unredacted 50 pages. So you can only assume there's got to be something pretty nasty for Anthony Fauci and the government agencies under those pages. By the way, nothing to do with national security. And we've looked at under the redactions, we've seen what false excuse they use for making the redactions. Again, they're lying to us. They're lying to us repeatedly. So I guess that's been my experience the last 8 years as chairman of the Senate Oversight Committee. I just don't trust government agencies. They've given me no reason to.
But what is it you're looking for that you think we don't already know?
Well, I don't think we'll ever find that. No, I mean,
On the source.
Because Anthony Fauci did a good job of engineering that any kind of lab leak theory was some wild conspiracy theory. Think of that. He knew it wasn't. I mean, the initial emails, the initial phone calls, they're giving about a 50-50 shot. And yet, within a couple of days, all of a sudden, that's conspiracy theory to cover up his tracks. So that gave China more than enough time to destroy any evidence they have. So they've wiped the genome information, all that kind of stuff off computers. I mean, I don't think we'll ever find the smoking gun, but what I certainly want to find is I want to find the corruption of how they engineered the cover-up.
There's been ongoing discussions at the state capitol about marijuana legalization. There's been some new developments, specifically from Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, who said he wants to vote on some proposal to legalize medical marijuana in some form. Do you believe it's time that Wisconsin starts joining our neighboring states and take a step forward and join us?
Well, first of all, I think when it comes to pharmaceuticals, I don't think there's really any molecule you ought to rule out. Just because something may be used for recreational purposes, whether it's legal or illegal, there's some pretty strong medicines you'd never let somebody use for recreation, but we use them to help heal people. So I'm all for the use of different molecules to be used in medicine. I would just exercise caution in terms of legalizing recreational use. I don't think we study enough the states that have done it. To me, one of the primary reasons for legalizing marijuana would be to get rid of the drug traffickers. The problem is the people that legalize it, here's going to be another good source of revenue. So they jack up the taxes, leaving enough room and margin for the drug traffickers, and the drug trafficking actually becomes worse because now they can be growing marijuana, and again, there are some no-go zones in California. You better not be hiking anywhere near where the cartels are growing the marijuana. So we are not fully contemplating this, and again, I would say the media has really fallen down on the job here in terms of really researching the unbelievable intrusion of the drug cartels and gangs into this country, the harmful effects of legalization of marijuana. It's like everything's coming up roses. It's not. There's an enormous societal cost to the legalization effort that we're just glossing over, because, quite honestly, because the media doesn't cover it. I think it's very unfortunate. This is one area we really deserve the truth before we move forward with legalizing it here in Wisconsin. But let's face it, it's out of control already. Was it 22 states now? We're surrounded by legalization. It's not like, if you want marijuana, it's not like you can't get it.
this is going to come out of left field for some in the audience, but not for you. In a recent video,
Bill, everything seems to come out of left
I
field.
know. In a recent video, you claimed you were concerned about digital currency, saying banks may be able to turn off your ability to purchase certain goods based on your societal credit score. This was a snippet. I'm wondering what it was that you're referring to, what's the concern you have, and why are you raising it?
Well,
I'm
a central bank or a government-run digital currency gives them just the ultimate control. That's what the whole point of vaccine passports was as well. You better get the vaccine, which we have not properly studied, that we're ignoring our own safety signals. But if you don't have that vaccine, we're going to require you to have a vaccine passport, and then you can't do X, Y, and Z. You can't. I mean, talk about the ultimate power to limit people's freedom. And digital currency would be that, probably on steroids. I mean, that's what China does. Social credit scores. We don't like what you've done, and it's a surveillance state already. All of a sudden, you're not going to be able to spend money to buy this, that, or the other thing. I think it's very dangerous. There's, by the way, a really good book, "The Creature from Jekyll Island." It's kind of an odd title, but it's the history of the formation of the Federal Reserve. 6 men in 1910 boarded a train from the Northeast down to Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. These 6 men represented a quarter of the wealth in the world. And they hatched a scheme to have a central bank, which was by and large just a cartel of the largest banks, to be able to convert us to more and more of a fractional reserve type of banking system and currency generation as well as manipulation. Listen, talking about currency, talking about money is an incredibly complex subject. But the corruption is actually pretty simple to understand. And the central bank has played a key role in that.
All right, we only got a few minutes before audience questions, so I hope this will be a short one. Looking into 2024, we're here in Milwaukee. We're looking at the RNC stage. If Donald Trump is on stage and he is the nominee, will you support him, or would you rather see someone else up on that stage?
No, listen, I'll support the nominee of the Republican Party.
What if it was Donald Trump?
I'll support the nominee of the Republican Party. Current thinking. Again, I mean, it's what I've always done.
Since that was so quick, let me just have one final quick question. Harlan Crow. He has donated to your campaign.
Do I know who?
Harlan Crow, I believe that's his name. He's the GOP megadonor who's now involved in the ethics questions around Clarence Thomas.
No, I don't know.
Okay. Do you have
Listen, he may have contributed to my campaign. All kinds, thousands of people do that. I don't know. I have a clue who they are.
Do you have any concerns about those donations and the ethics questions?
Don't know enough about it.
About Justice Clarence Thomas?
No, again, I don't know the specifics. Is that the guy he's traveling with? Is that what you're talking about? Is that the guy he's traveling with? Oh, okay. I'm aware of it, but it doesn't hold my interest that much.
Questions from our audience?
Nice and loud because I'm deaf in one ear.
Steve Schuster, Wisconsin Law Journal.
Steve Schuster, Wisconsin Law Journal. You said in a January 3rd, 2023 AP story that you could not remember text messages sent from your staff to Vice President Pence's staff regarding delivering fake certificates to overturn the election. How should your constituents feel about your inability to recall such an important event?
Because it lasted a few seconds, okay? Again, I've totally described this. I got a text from Jim Trupus, okay, saying he had something that he needed to deliver to the vice president. Can I find somebody to help get that delivered? So I went to my brand new chief of staff, who'd been formerly working in my office, went to the White House, and asked him, can you take care of this? And over the course of the next 60 or 70 minutes, he figured out that the vice president wasn't accepting anything. And then I texted back to Jim Trupus, he's not taking any deliveries. End of story. That's it. So when this whole story broke, I'm going, can barely remember it, didn't remember the text message, didn't even know where the request came from, but we pieced it together over the course of a number of days. Of course, the media wanted immediate answers. I couldn't even remember. It was such a non-event to me and to my office. We had to really research what happened. Digging back into text messages, which are not readily available necessarily on your iPhone. So it took us a while to piece it together, but we've been completely transparent about it. It was a big nothing burger. But I know the biased media has tried to make it some big conspiracy. It was nothing of the sort.
So once you learned about these text messages to Pence's staff, what actions did you take?
Nothing. Again, it was a nothing burger.
Thank you.
I'll just add, if an attorney, and I knew that Trupus had represented Trump here in Wisconsin, right? If an attorney for the President of the United States contacts you and say, can you deliver something to the Vice President? What are you going to do? Ask him 65,000 questions and grill him on it? I said, well, I'll see if we can deliver. I had no idea what he was asking me to deliver. So we just checked into it. Didn't deliver anything. End of story. The entire episode took, I think, 70 minutes. My involvement lasted seconds. Okay?
You say you're not a scientist, right? But on April 12th in the Facebook page, you say that 600,000 Americans are dying from vaccines annually from the COVID vaccine. You posted on your Facebook page.
No, you'd have to show.
I'll show it to you.
I do not believe that's true.
I'll show it to you.
Well, show it to
You're
us.
Senator Ron Johnson, right?
No, I've never said that the vaccines killed 600,000 people.
You posted
Never.
on April 12th.
No.
I'll show all the press here.
No, it's false.
What about Jared Kushner's laptop? And what about the trademark stuff with the Kushners? With China?
Well, let's face it. We can rely on the media to investigate folks on that side of the
I
aisle.
could care less about Hunter Biden.
Okay.
How about-
Anyway, what are you
how
saying about
South-
600? That's just not true.
What's it?
I never, first of all, I don't post on Facebook myself anyway.
Oh, I see.
No, I don't. But I have never, the only thing I've ever talked about deaths associated with the vaccine is what's reported on VAERS, and it's now over 35,000 deaths on VAERS. That's all I've ever said.
Okay.
Other people have made calculations and made estimates that are much higher.
Okay.
But that's not me.
I see.
Okay, next question.
Hello, Senator Johnson, Ben Mobley, Concordia University, Wisconsin. Just wanted to ask a question about the expenditures for the Ukraine war, and how does that fit in your budget thinking going forward?
Well, this is not a simple topic. I think Americans almost universally support the courage of the Ukrainian people. I think we all recognize Vladimir Putin as a war criminal engaged in all kinds of atrocities. I think we could have prevented that. Again, you achieve peace through strength, starting with economic strength. Just about everything this administration has done is weaken this country and go through the litany of horribles. And then this administration did not provide the lethal defensive weaponry up front and visibly and publicly to help deter Vladimir Putin. Once he invaded, because of the courage of the Ukrainian people, he wasn't able to overrun the country. By the way, I think that's pretty much what Biden expected, which is why they offered him a plane ride out, and I think they were just willing to let Ukraine fall. But the Ukrainian people fought back. There was a moment in time, I think, had the West acted decisively and provided the weaponry they needed, you might have actually driven Russia out. But that time is past, it's gone. It's not a fair fight. Vladimir Putin, with impunity, can lob missiles in and destroy infrastructure, kill citizens, or kill non-combatant women and children. Ukraine can't do that back to Russia. Russia has, I think, 7,000 nuclear weapons. And they're certainly rattling their saber. Now they're moving nuclear weapons into Belarus, apparently. So it's not a fair fight. It's not a level playing field. At some point in time, so here we are today. I don't see any scenario in which the final result of Ukraine is going to be better than it is today. And it's awful right now. Okay? So, and that's for everybody. Not for Putin, not for Ukraine, not for this needs to end. Okay? So I get really concerned when I hear the Uniparty beating the drums of war I don't want to bluff or blunder our way into nuclear holocaust. I hear people say, well, this is like appeasement. No, this is not like it was prior to World War II. There weren't nuclear weapons during that moment of appeasement. Okay? Now we have nuclear weapons. We need to be unbelievably careful. And I don't want people beating the drums of war, whether it's against Russia, whether it's against China and Taiwan. We need to be sober and recognize the reality situation right now. And this administration has so weakened this country, so weakened our military, so weakened our financial situation. The last thing we can afford to do is blunder into some conflict with China or Russia.
Good afternoon, Ron. I have a question concerning what the Republicans in the House of Representatives recently passed a bill protecting women in sports from transgender and biological males. Now, my granddaughters are fairly young, but they are showing tremendous athletic ability, naturally taking after their grandfather. And I would like to know, and so would the mothers of my grandchildren and my sons would like to know, if you see anybody in the Senate on the other side crossing the aisle and voting to protect real women in sports.
You know, I never thought in my lifetime we would see our daughters have to compete against biological males. I never thought that we see where those biological males were expecting to shower in the girls' locker rooms with our daughters. I never thought I'd see a judge order that happen. I never thought I'd see school administrators want to administer gender-blocking drugs to our children without parental knowledge. All these things are happening. It's unbelievable. But no, there will be no Democrats in the United States Senate that will sign on to that. I'm fairly confident, maybe one or two, but not enough to pass the bill. I hope that we have champions in the Wisconsin legislature that'll pass that piece of legislation. Now, will Tony Evers sign it? Probably not. But we ought to pass these protections for our women and for our daughters. I think it's vital. Where are the feminists? Standing up for women's sports, for women's rights. But listen, we're a compassionate society. People with gender dysphoria, we have compassion for. Okay, we don't want to see anybody discriminate against them, but allowing biological males to compete against our daughters or not allowing would not be discrimination. That's just called common sense. Okay?
Okay, one more question. Who's got a question?
I was raised Republican, hardcore. Like I grew up, I introduced my family to Rush Limbaugh. 47, I was listening to it when I was a teenager and introduced it to my grandma and the other people. That's where I started, and I'm not there anymore. And when I hear you talk about the left, and you talk about them in language that assumes that we should trust you and your judgment, but the people on the left, they're a bunch of crazy radical people that want to do all these horrible things. I'm just curious, like, how is that? We're supposed to distrust them, but we're supposed to trust you. We're supposed to dislike people like me are the problem often when you talk, but how do you and I work this out? Because I'm from Wisconsin, right? I live in Milwaukee, and you're my senator, and whenever you open your mouth about the things that I care about, it's always pejorative and dismissive and aggressive. And so I'm just curious, like, what is the path you see for you and I to ever agree on anything?
Again, that's your typification of it. I wouldn't agree with how you typify the way I address issues. Again, I just laid out my belief in terms of what's happening with transgenderism and biological males competing in women's sports. Again, I'm just telling you, I think it's crazy that we're allowing that. Again, there's nothing, I'm not demagogic on that way. I'm not bombastic. I don't know if any of you watched Bobby Kennedy's announcement speech, almost 2 hours long. I watched the whole thing. I've actually developed a pretty good relationship with Bobby Kennedy. But I'll give you a couple other, I talked about the Creature from Jekyll Island. Here's 2 books of Bobby Kennedy recommend that I read, and I did read them. JFK and the Unspeakable, and The Devil's Chessboard. I recommend everybody read those. They'll be somewhat eye-opening. But I thought it was interesting in Bobby Kennedy's speech is an awful lot of echoes of what I've always said. So let's focus on areas of agreement. I come from the private sector. You don't accomplish anything in the private sector arguing with everybody. So there's plenty of things that divide us, but let's focus on areas of agreement, which is what I did as chairman of a committee. That's how I passed over 300 pieces of legislation, pretty much nonpartisan. 130 of those got signed into law. So I'm all for finding areas of agreement. The other thing that I appreciate about Bobby Kennedy's speech is he made a commitment to telling the truth, conveying the truth. Okay, now, I don't think truth is relative, but there's certainly different perceptions about what is truth. But what I've done as your U.S. Senator, I guarantee this. I made 2 promises when I first ran in 2010. I'll never vote my reelection in mind, and I've honored that promise. And the other thing I promise is I'll always tell you the truth. And I've scrupulously honored that promise as well. Now, we might disagree, and I'm very respectful of people that disagree with me, but actions that are being taken, by government, by officials, that are literally destroying this country. The debt and deficit. I mean, all the divisiveness. I mean, think. I didn't call you. Listen, yeah, you do have to use some shorthand in this business, talking about radical leftists. So I'm not talking about every Democrat.
But you're talking about.
Well, if you're a radical leftist and you got some of these crazy views, I guess I'd call you a radical leftist. Crazy. But I'm not calling you that.
Why are they crazy?
Well, again, having biological males compete with our daughters, I think that's kind of crazy. Okay. I think $32 trillion worth of debt with no end in sight. I think it's kind of crazy. I think open borders and the flood of deadly drugs and sex trafficking. I think that's crazy. I think it's horrible. It's harmful, and we're ignoring all those things. But anyway, getting back to my point, there are elements in our country that are driving division. I think the vast majority of Americans embrace Martin Luther King's vision of this country, that we evaluate people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I'm 68 years old. I've seen a dramatic reduction in discrimination of all forms during my lifetime. Does discrimination exist? Sure, it always will. But we've actually made some pretty strong improvements. Why not celebrate that success as opposed to what is happening, and this is critical race theory, exacerbating divides. Driving greater division. Okay, that's what I'm opposed to, and I'm sorry. I think that's not only crazy; it's destructive. And I think this nation is something so rare and so precious. And I think Americans are good people across the board. I think we are good people. I've said this repeatedly. We share the same goal. We all want a safe, prosperous, secure America. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we need to focus on those areas of agreement. But again, you get in the political realm, you got issues, there's divisions. You acknowledge that. You fight for what you think is right. Okay? You can't just lay over and let this country be destroyed. Okay? Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Thanks to our media panel, and I'd also like to thank all the visiting media who are with us today. We'd also like to thank our sponsors and the Newsroom Pub and Safe House for letting us hold our events here. If you're interested in the Press Club, you can see Joette on your way out, and she can give you all kinds of information about getting involved with the Press Club. And I will mention 2 upcoming events. A week from Friday, May 5th, we'll be hosting Wisconsin Speaker Robin Vos. Encourage all of you interested in politics at the state level to come to that event here at the Newsroom Pub. And then on Friday, May 12th, we have our annual Gridiron Awards at the Pfister Hotel, and that's also open to the public. So thanks very much and have a good rest of the day.